stand next to me, John. Otherwise, if you stand like there, that would look like a midget. So this is my friend John. Hello, everyone. If you haven't seen me already, I've been up instead. But this is my friend John. He's absolutely incredible. Rachel and I have known John, she's almost 9 years. September will be 9 years. He was there when we met. Would you step?
I knew you before Rachel.
You knew me before Rachel. Cool. Yeah, we stayed in the same room. Anyway, so we did something called Harvest School. Has anyone heard of Iris Ministries? Yeah. George has, because George went. There we go. And Iris Ministries has got a school for people that want to do missions work called Harvest School. And we did Harvest 17 together. We stayed in the same house, right? In tent. Same tent. You were in room 1.
He brought a tent full of holes, and they have mosquitoes there. I think, well, here's the thing, Josh. You were like the only student who like hitchhiked to Mozambique because he's right down the road. And,
it's down the road from South Africa, yes.
So, everyone else flies in, but Josh, I think, like, how did you got there some crazy way? But he like brought this giant like army tent, and it had holes in it.
It's pretty bad.
And you had, malaria and stuff there. And, he came to my tent, and he's like, hey man, I'm like, got all these holes in my tent. And I'm like, well, I got room. I had a 2-person tent, so I'm like, we just, stayed together. And
that was fun.
Didn't get bit by
I
mosquitoes.
got worms in my feet after that outreach. It was lots of fun. I remember them picking it out of my feet. Anyway, parasites are bad. That's terrible. I heard stories about it. And there's this one, I'm like, what is this blister? And one of Heidi Baker's sons comes to me. He's like, yeah, Heidi gets it all the time. We got to dig it out. I'm like, dig what out? And he just starts like hacking at my foot, and out comes a worm. My point exactly. Lots of fun. But today, John and I are going to share some really, really cool stories. John I would consider you to be a missionary. And he's been a really good friend of ours for very many years. And I know his radical stories about Jesus and what Jesus has done in his life and through him and what he's seen. So today, I am going to literally just the Bible verse that I got, and then we're just going to expand from that. Is that okay? So it's going to be different. It's going to be a little bit more conversational between John and I. We've never done this before, but it's kind of like we have a cup of coffee together and you guys just together go along the ride. Did that even come out in English? Yeah. Good. Just checking. So, Bible verse for today is Hebrews 11 verse 1. Does anyone know what that is? I sound like Sunday school right now. It's one of my favorite Bible verses. Now, faith is, enough said, I can go home. Faith is the confidence of what we hope for, the assurance of what we are about. I got your text and I started reading that instead of the verse. Thanks, bro. Now, faith is the confidence in what we hope for, the assurance about what we do not see. I'm going to say that again. Now, faith is the confidence in what we hope for, the assurance about what we do not see. That's faith. And then in Hebrews 11 it goes on by saying, verse 3, by faith we understand that the universe was formed. By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain. By faith Enoch was taken from this life to the next so they didn't have to experience death. By faith, Noah warned the people of things to come. And it just goes on and on about the testimonies of our forefathers that saw God do great things by faith in action. So today I really want to share some stories, just like rip a piece of our life experience and just have communion together, if that's okay with you guys. So I'm going to ask John, you want to say something?
No, you go for it.
Oh, I don't know what I'm doing, bro.
Good.
So John, question. As a missionary, how do you have finances?
I don't know how to answer that question. And well, this is the thing, like right now I'm kind of living that, so it's the weird part. I actually just I came here actually to Chicago this last week because my brother got married. He lives out here. So I kind of got overwhelmed by the whole idea of trying to figure out when to go home. So I booked a one-way ticket to Chicago, and then I'll figure it out later. But for me, it always comes in different ways.
We're going surfing. The lake. Let's go.
We're going to go to Wyoming and surf. So no, I mean, a lot of times it really is, for me, it's all relational. And I'll say this, anything that we share here is completely useless if you don't know Jesus. Like, if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, you're not gonna, you can try to like apply stuff by going like, oh, here's a good principle. Here's a good prayer, pray this. But it's all in relationship with Jesus. Because he's the one who tells you, you need to ask someone right now. And he's the one who tells you to like keep your mouth shut. You know, he's the one who tells you, you need to go and like, so when, like, the funny thing is, today is actually the day that I got accepted to Harvest School that we went to.
No, you're joking.
Yeah, I periodically go through my Facebook and try to delete as much as I can, because who knows when I'm going to not need that to come and, you know, bite me later. So I was looking at my on this day stuff, because I do it one day at a time because it's overwhelming otherwise. And I was like, oh wow, what am I going to delete today? And I said, oh, today's the day I got accepted to Harvest School. The way I got accepted to Harvest School was by faith, because I didn't have the finances for it. I was pretty broke. I went to Fiji to do some kind of like evangelism, it was an internship with a group called Evangelism Explosion. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. It's pretty old school. They use these parables to share the gospel. It's wonderful. It actually helps people remember it because you hear a story and you retain it differently than when I just explain a principle. You know, when I explain, you know, what a free gift is, which is grace, you know, I can tell you it's free, you don't have to pay for it, all that stuff. That's abstract. But when I tell you that I just gave you, you know, like here's my car, here's my car keys, you can have that. And you're like, cool, thanks. And I'm like, I don't want any payment for it. And you try to give me 20 bucks. And I'm like, well, 20 bucks is kind of cheapening this gift, right? Because it's a car. I actually wanted to give you a gift out of the kindness of my heart. God's grace is that way, right? It's like a free gift. You try to pay for it. It actually takes away from what grace is, right? So that's going to stick in your head a little better. Anyway, so that was the internship I did. That was completely free. I don't know how that I don't think they ever did it again, but it was just a thing where someone went, hey, we want to pay for all these people to go, apply. I applied, I got in, and I went to Fiji for 6 weeks. And then I had this thought that I wanted to do the Harvest School with Iris Ministries, where I met Josh. And I didn't have the faith for it, though. I was like, who's going to send me across the world to go to a school, like basically a giant conference, where I'm going to learn about, like, missionary stuff? Shouldn't I be doing the missionary stuff? Isn't that what God would want? Like, doesn't he want me to be productive here? Doesn't he want me to do something that's a little more like hardcore that way? And you know, who's going to send me to just go and receive? And so it just didn't make sense to me that God would do that. So I went, you know, God, you're going to have to pony up if you want this to work, because I'm broke. And I think it was a $200 fee.
That was the deposit.
To hold your place. Like, so if you got in, it's like, great, you got in, but, you know.
Wasn't it $500?
No, it was $200. This is why I know. Sorry,
I can't remember.
I remember it because this is part of my story here. So I was like flying into Fiji, going like, all right, after 6 weeks, I have no idea where I'm going or what I'm doing, but God, I trust you. And I'm sitting next to this couple on the plane, and they're on their honeymoon, and I don't talk to them until we're landing. And they're like, oh, you know, I'm from California. They're from a different part of California, and they're asking me if I know, you know, they found out I went to church, and they were doing this thing. We go to church. Have you heard of Heidi Baker? I'm like, oh, that's a crazy, weird question to ask to someone flying into Fiji, you know, because not very many people that I know have heard of Heidi Baker before that. So I'm like, that's really cool, but God, I told you I need $200 or I'm not going, and that's what I need. So anyway, I took that as a sign, just apply. So I applied to that school, and then I ended up back at my aunt's house in Colorado for just a week, just to see her and to visit. And I didn't have the money yet, but I don't even know if I think I might have been accepted, but I'm sitting there in her house, I'm about to leave her house, and she goes, hey, John, I just want to give you a little gift for travel. And she writes me a check for $200, which she's never done before, you know, which is weird, but you have no idea what this means. This is actually confirmation that I can go, and that God's actually on this. And at that point, I didn't have a problem asking for the funds. I knew God was going to bring them, but before that, I didn't know that He'd confirmed it. So for me, how do I raise money? It's different every time. It's always in relationship with the Lord. What's He doing? At first, I told Him, this is what I need to know that You're in it. But then later, once I knew He was in it, I went, okay, well, I'm not really ashamed to, ask people, or to put my need out there. But it changes every time. Yeah, I don't know.
So does Jesus provide for your finances, or do the relationships you walk into provide for finances? Do you understand what I mean?
No, I think Jesus is the answer to that.
Just clarifying. So it's pretty radical. Here's another question. You can ask me whatever you want to, but what is the most radical financial miracle you've seen? Not only with yourself, but just the first one that pops into your mind. Like the most radical financial miracle that you've ever seen. It's a big one.
Ooh, give me a second to let that one stew.
Yeah, that's a really, really good one.
Yeah, I'm sure I have a good one, but it'll come to me in like an hour.
So I remember like when I started this whole journey of being a missionary, I was a part of a mega church in South Africa. And their way of thinking for missions work is that you've got to go write a newsletter, send the newsletter to all of the business people that you know, all of these really good principles for raising funds and awareness. And I remember sitting down in front of my computer, typing out this email, and absolutely having no peace about this. None. And every time I type it, I'll get distracted, I'll walk away, had no peace. And the one day I got so frustrated, I was like, I've got to pay this tuition, and I can't because I haven't sent out this email to tell people that I'm even doing a school. And God said to me, He was like, Joshua, I did not tell you to do that. I'm like, but this is what you're supposed to do. He's like, I didn't tell you to do this. Religion and customs and traditions were placed on me. Much like David when he was going to go and face Goliath, Saul put his armor on him. And God instantly gave me this revelation that my breakthrough financially, for example, is not the same as other people's breakthrough. I cannot give you a blueprint on how to have financial breakthrough. It comes from a relationship with God. And I remember this moment very clearly. It says Joshua, and that's when He gave me the Bible verse, Matthew 10:10. Go to the nations 2 by 2. Do not take a change of clothes. Do not take a wallet. Don't ask for money. The workers work his labors. That's all I heard. So I was like, okay. And God was like, Joshua, I want you to be a son. And a son doesn't have to ask for what they need. A son asks for what they want. So Joshua, what do you want? Stop worrying about what you need, because I'm your dad. Of course I'm going to sort that out. Isn't that good? It's like, there, in that moment, I had that revelation that God was my Father. I hadn't had an experience of a father that will provide for me in that way. In fact, my experience of a dad was, I couldn't even go and ask him for like $2 to go and buy, I don't know, a sweet at the candy shop, or candy from the candy shop. And I couldn't even do that. Like I was so afraid. My dad would be like, "Where do you think money comes from? Does it grow on trees?" No, I don't have the money. So I couldn't approach my dad. I've never had that experience. Your experience might not be the same as mine. Mine might be a little bit extreme. But I couldn't approach my dad for finances. So I put God into that same box, and I didn't want to approach Him about my finances. I always felt awkward, afraid, scared that He was going to reject me. And God said in that moment, Joshua, I want to destroy the box that you have put me in, because you need to be a son that walks in radical faith about finances, because I've called you not only to provide for yourself, but for your family and all the people that I've called you to lead and father and be a spiritual father to. So I knew in that moment that this one breakthrough that was so personal to me had nothing to do with me, but it had to do with the people around me. In the future, right at that moment, God was saying, I need you to have breakthrough for the people that you're supposed to lead. And now, what do? We feed 250 people a day in South Africa? We feed them. Where does that finances come from? I still don't know. I have no idea. Talk to my accountants in South Africa. They get really irritated with me because I'm like, I don't know where it comes from, but we've got to buy it. What's your budget? I don't know. We just got to buy it. And God always provides. And it comes from that, it's like you can trace it all the way back down until this moment with God that I had. And it was so simple. Yeah.
Yeah, I do actually. I was thinking about it, and probably the first time, so I grew up, I was a missionary kid. My parents were, they were missionaries, but I don't know if you guys have heard of the Vineyard movement, but we were Vineyard people. And, my mom has like crazy, I learned from my mom actually, how to trust God with finances. Because, when you're on the mission field, a lot of times you have what you need. And I never felt poor, but we never really felt rich either. But, at one point, and this is part of my story, my dad actually left us while we were overseas, and God spoke to my mom and told her, trust me, in German, which we were in Switzerland. And she, he just said Vertrauen, which means trust. And she just started bawling. And we lived in this country that was one of the most expensive countries in the world. I mean, you're talking, you want to go to McDonald's, you're going to drop $20 to get a meal. It's crazy for one person. So we're, all of our supporters, they pulled out because they're like, well, go home. Your husband left you, go home. And God said, no, stay here and trust me. And so my mom went, well, I'm going to trust God's voice. I don't know why. I don't know why I'm here. It doesn't make any sense. And we never went without. People would drop money in our bank account, all kinds of stuff. And so I went, all right, well, this is my heritage, right? This is what I'm growing up with. A lady who does crazy things, follows the Lord even when it doesn't make sense. And we lived in Switzerland for a whole year. We were never hungry. We were always well taken care of. And when it was time to go, we went home, because God let us know. But, so my time of practicing this, I went, okay, this is what my mom did, so I can do this too, right? Be careful, parents. We will do some of the stuff that you guys want us to do, but not always the stuff that you think that we should do. So my parents are like, what are you doing? And I'm like, you did this. This is your doing. I didn't come up with this. So I went to, when I got out of college, I had all this debt. I told God, when you get me out of debt, my college debt, I'll go. I know you want me to go overseas, but it's up to you. If it takes 10 years, takes 10 years, takes 1 year, takes 1 year. That's up to you. And so I just worked, and then 2 years later, I was completely out of my college debt, which is insane. And I went, okay, now it's time to go. And so I tried to go to this outreach in Berlin. It was like an evangelism outreach on the streets, and I was like, this is going to be awesome. And then it got canceled. And I went, oh, okay. And then all of a sudden I had 3 options. I had an opportunity to go to Uganda with my church to do this business, this mission thing where you go and teach people how to run businesses, and I was like, that's totally not my deal. But whatever, it's an opportunity. I'm not a business guy. And then there was one in Burundi with this church of really rich old people from the coast of South Carolina, where they live on golf courses, and there's alligators that live there and stuff. And Burundi's if you don't know Burundi is a little tiny country in the very center of Africa, and
they don't have alligators in Burundi.
No. I mean in South Carolina.
Oh.
Yeah, they have the ones that the presidents play golf on, and the PGA Tour comes through. That was their home, and they're all these rich Episcopalians. And I went and visited because they had a Burundi meeting, and I went, this sounds cool, it'll never happen, but I'll go and just see what happens. And I went to the meeting, and they really liked me, and they said, you should come. And I went, I can't afford it. So, and then there was another one where I had a friend who was serving in that country, and she was like, hey, come and stay with us for a while. And I went, that sounds like the most fun. But God had told me no, and for a bit. So I went, all right, what am I going to do? And I went, eventually I just picked Uganda. I went, I don't know if this is God, but I'll go to Uganda. I asked everyone I knew for money. Everyone. Sent out a giant email that I probably didn't listen to the Lord. I had that feeling, and I was like, I'm just going to do it. And I hit the button, send, and I got everything I needed. And so I got in, and I was kind of worried about it. And a friend of mine said, I was like, which one should I pick? And one of my friends said, well, what if God says do all of them? And I'm like, well, no, God wouldn't do that. He wants you to do one, and you can ask all your friends every 6 months or so. because you don't want to be extorting them for spiritual vacations. And and so I was like really worried because I had this thought that like God doesn't give you. He's not abundant, you know, like he gives you what you need to like just hold on. And that's not God's heart, you know, he's more than that. And so I thought he would never give me the desires of my heart, which was to like go. And so anyway, I was like, okay, well he'll never do that. But it always stuck in my mind, like what if he wants me to do all three? So anyway, I ended up raising money to go to Uganda and just went, fine, I'll do it. Probably not God's will. He's going to slap me on the wrist because I did the wrong thing, but I'm going to go anyway. So I went, and before I leave, this like church goes, hey, you know, we really want you to come with us. You know, we're like these really old people. I'm the only person who's young. Like they're all like super retired. And they're really nice. I love them. But they're like, you know, they're like going to go build like a playground or something, and that was going to be their thing in a house. And I was like, oh, okay, this is like another service one. I want to go do this stuff where you're praying for people and seeing their eyes open, and you know, that stuff. And but that just wasn't their gig. But they invited me, and I'm like, look, I can't afford it. And they're like, okay. And then like they called me back. I'm like, well, what if, you know, we do this? And I'm like, I basically kept denying them until they're like, okay, fine. We want to pay for your tickets and your whole thing, and we'll just take you. We really feel like you're supposed to come with us. And I went, all right, cool. And then I just felt from God to go, you know, you can, my friend Olivia, who was the country director in Burundi for this ministry that they were with, said, you know, you can come stay with us for up to 6 months if you want.
Wow.
And I went, that sounds really cool. I want to do that. And so I just went, I felt like that was God, and God opened the door. He told me, he reversed it. He had told me no, and then he went, okay, now you can go. And when he said yes, I went, okay, Olivia, I can go. Don't know how it's going to work. And I just told my friends, I'm going to go to Burundi, going to go to Uganda. When I come back a month later, I go to Burundi, and I'm just going to go for as long as God provides. And if I run out of money, I run out of money. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm just going to go. And the crazy thing is, this is how I raised funds. I did nothing. Because I couldn't ask everyone again for more money. I couldn't do it. I couldn't go, hey guys, I want to go on a second mission trip. I know you guys already gave generously, give me more. And I went, God, you're going to have to provide. And literally, people started handing me money. Like $500 at a time though. Like, not like, here's 20 bucks. I got like 3 or 4 people handing me everything that I needed to go. And I went, okay, God, you're confirming that you're in this. And that's really what it was. And it was me learning relationally who God was. It wasn't about the finances.
Come on, bro.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not about the money itself. Like, what you're getting out of it, it's not like, oh, God's providing, so... It's actually, you're learning his heart. And his heart for you is good. His heart for you is actually to give you what you need to do what he's called you to do.
Yeah.
So it's not so much about, like, you know, a ledger or something like that, or some kind of thing of like, how do I extract from God? He's like, no, I've got what you need.
Yeah.
And that's, so yeah, and I went to Burundi for 4 months, had a blast, came home and figured it all out.
John's radical. But the reason why I was feeling like God wants to highlight finances this morning, and with finances, with faith, is that in America I've noticed it's very easy to make money. It's not a difficult thing for you to go and get a 3rd, 4th, 5th job. But what is difficult to do is to say, God, you've called me to do something, and my finances are in submission to you. I don't work for finances. Finances work for me. They're a tool. They're not what we live for. And so many times anxiety, fear, worry, where's the next paycheck going to come from? How am I going to buy this? How am I going to do this? They creep in so quickly. But it's just a tool that God uses to develop character and build faith in our own hearts. And it's so much fun going on this journey with God and saying, God, provide. I know some missionaries that stood by faith for 2 years and God didn't provide anything for them. But you know what? Their faith is so solid because he provided in other ways. They were invited into relationships, to have meals with people. They got to know a community of people because they didn't have finances. And they learned so much. They were as poor as church mice, but it was lots of fun. And it's a God of abundance, so it's both, okay? I'm going to transition just real quickly. John, there is, no, don't worry, I'm not going to put you on the spot that much. But there is this one moment, bro, when we went on a missions trip, the first one we went to. We were like one of the first schools. Oh, are you there with the wall? Okay, you went there for that one, that was snack, I think. Anyway. Okay, so John and I, we went on this missions trip together, okay, right? And the reason why I went to Mozambique, to be honest with you, is because God told me to, yes. And I wanted to see the dead raised. And Iris Ministry has seen loads of dead people raised. So I went because I was hungry. And I'd pay any price to see this so that I could receive it and go and give it to a bunch of dead people. So I prayed for like 3 dead people and they had to come back to life. And I was feeling very despondent. And like, God, you really raise the dead. I know you do, but I haven't experienced it. Oh, look, Iris does. Let's go. So I went. Didn't see any dead people raised, but we did go on an outreach, you and I, and we prayed, what was it? Help me out, because this is the faith trip. Remember? What's that girl's name with the tumors? Do you remember her name?
A giant boil.
She had,
yeah. Like that big. On her neck.
Anyway, so hold this thought. We go to a Muslim village, right? There's no hospital like 3 villages away.
There's a clinic.
There was a clinic, but it was, I'm getting it wrong. You see, this is so good.
You got the good parts.
I got the good part. Anyway, the Muslim chief goes to the clinic and gets all of the worst cases. This is what I heard. Daniel Salata told me. And like, this is the tent that we were sharing. Like the sun rises at 5 a.m. in the morning and it's the full force of the African sun on your little tent. And you climb out of that tent like, help me Jesus, I've just been in the sauna. And as you unzip the tent, you look around and there's just all of these people all around us. And like they are sick and dying. And the Muslim chief says, you say your God will heal the sick while he has the worst cases. Prove it to me. We didn't know this was happening. I didn't know. And as we climb out the tent, you're like, be healed. I never really felt like that. You know, all of a sudden the team just kicked into place and we just started praying for people. And as we were praying, you please add as I go along here, John. But as we were praying, I got to this one girl. Do you remember her name? I thought you would. Anyway, got to this one girl, and she had all these tumors and stuff like that, and we prayed for her, and nothing happened. She didn't get healed. And we prayed, get a little bit discouraged, so I moved on and kept on praying for a bunch of people, saw them all healed, and then all of a sudden I was back at this girl. Prayed for her again, nothing happened. Got very discouraged, so I went around praying, got back to this girl, and by that point, there was like hardly anyone that was sick left, right?
Yeah, so this girl came in, and the whole team had kind of just taken her in, and we were all kind of taking turns praying for her. Like, it wasn't one of those things where sometimes you pray for people, and God does something instantly. Mm-hmm. And there's an instant.
This was not one of those moments.
But we prayed, and we just diligently were like pouring our hearts out, praying for this girl, and this boil.
Whoa, before you go there. So, nothing was happening. I remember this moment, bro. Nothing was happening. And then, all of a sudden, like the discouragement of a miracle not happening, like you put your faith out there and it doesn't happen. And you can feel the despondency and the discouragement just seep into the team's hearts. And everyone that is watching is like, she was like 12 or whatever. Everyone just gets so like down. And I remember, this is how I remember it, but I remember just being like, no. And I put up my hands and I just started worshiping Jesus. And everyone just starts worshiping Jesus. Do you remember this, John? Everyone just starts worshiping Jesus. And by the time we had finished worshiping,
it had shrunk down noticeably, like really small, like enough where the village could see. And that was the difference. It wasn't just that like it was a thing that I experienced, but the whole village, you know, they're very connected. Yeah. They could tell. They're like, oh, we know this girl.
Didn't they? Wasn't it like a moment where we were worshiping and we all stopped worshiping and we looked at the girl and the whole village was like, oh, wow. Right? It was like that kind of moment. And you just hear it like erupt in the whole village as they literally saw this huge boil going down in size in front of their eyes. Undeniably amazing. Jesus was incredible. And I learned something from that moment. I don't know if you wanted to explain some more, but I learned something in that moment about how to manage disappointment. Like, we all are encountering and experiencing disappointment. But what do we do with the disappointment matters the most. Because disappointment isn't a fruit of the Spirit. So what we do with it is important. Either we choose to partner with disappointment and believe the lie that God does not do those miracles. Or God, oh, I don't have enough faith, obviously. Or what you know what I'm talking about. All those bunch of lies. And I learned in that moment like how to shift my perspective from being disappointed in God not answering my prayers to responding and saying, God, I'm still going to worship you as a God that heals the sick, even though I've not experienced in this moment. Isn't that incredible? And like then it shifted because we didn't pray for her to get healed. She was just healed. Does that make sense? Anyway, that's what I learned from that.
How do you approach faith? How do you approach a situation?
I know what you're asking.
Well, maybe I'll explain my way, and then you can do it. Have anyone here ever read anything about Watchman Nee? That thing sound familiar? I read a book once.
Great, good book.
That changed my whole faith because it actually taught me how to get out of works, right? Because that's actually what grace is. That's what faith is. It's getting out of works. It's actually going, God, actually, you're the one in charge. You're the one who's in control. You're the one who's got all the power. You're the one who's, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to respond to it, but I'm not going to take responsibility for it in the way that actually takes away from Him. Do you know what I mean? So, in Ephesians, it's basically a story. It's called Sit, Walk, Stand. If you want, it's a great book. It's like, take you like an hour and a half to read tops. I took 3 days because it's 3 chapters, and I read 1 chapter a day. And the first one is probably the best one, which is a chapter called Sit, and it's pretty easy. You just sit down. And this has been my approach to faith most of my life, and it's how I got saved. I mean, I was stuck in pornography when I was in like high school. Completely addicted, had no hope of getting out. I tried for years, couldn't do it. Didn't tell anyone, by the way, because it's super shameful and scary, and you don't want to let anyone know what you're dealing with. But I went, God, if you're God, you can get rid of this. And if you're not, then I don't need to worry about it. And I went, either you deal with this or I'm walking away. Because I can't keep trying. I can't keep trying to control this. Faith is letting go of control. It's actually giving God control. And so I just let go. And a week later, He dealt with it. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't work on it. He did it. And I went, okay, this is how my faith has worked. And then somehow I went from going, oh, I can give this stuff to God, to going, oh, I need to make my works better. I need to figure it out. So I went, if I just read the Bible a lot, I can figure out, like, how to do everything right. It tells you, if you read, like, especially the epistles, it's like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, do this. These are good things. This is what good people do. And so I went, oh, I just got to figure out how to do the good stuff and not do the bad stuff. And then I realized at one point that my little house of cards was crumbling down because I thought I was doing really good. But then there were always things where I would, like, regress. And you're like, oh, but I can't. I'm still a mean person in this area, but I'll get there, I'll keep working at it, and I won't be very mean to my brothers and stuff, and my friends. And then I realized I actually can't do it. I literally can't do it. And I read this book by Watchman Nee, and it's called Sit, Walk, Stand, and basically the idea is, you read the chapter 1 of Ephesians, and it talks about how amazing God is. God is like, He's on the throne, He's doing all this cool stuff. Anytime it mentions like us initiating something, it doesn't really turn out very well. And so in chapter 2 it says, when you were dead in your trespasses and sins, God raised you to life and seated you in heavenly places with Christ. So when you were dead, that's where you begin your life of faith, right? You're dead. What can you do when you're dead? Nothing, right? You're powerless. And who raised you to life? God did, right? The Father raised you to life. By the way, it says he did this to Jesus too. So if you don't, this is kind of crazy. But he raised you to life, and he seats you with Jesus in heavenly places. And what that means is where you start your faith, where you start your life in Christ is sitting down. It's a place of rest. I didn't get there because I can climb up to the top and work my way up there. It's actually, God put me there. So any position I have is with God. If you feel distant from God, the fact is, you're as close to him as you're going to get. If you feel really close to him right now, you're as far away from him as you're going to get. It's not about your feeling. It's about the truth. And the truth is that you're seated with him. You are with him right now. And you can't work your way closer, and you can't sin your way further away from him. It's in Ephesians. You can read it if you don't believe me. Ephesians 2. So anyway, you're seated with him. And it's that place of going, of actually going when you're seated, you're at rest. And it's funny, we were actually driving here today, and I see hawks everywhere. It's the way God speaks to me. One time I saw 140 of them on the single drive, which is insane. I don't know how many hawks are around here, but they have little territories, so you can imagine there's some space between them. But what they're doing is they're sitting, and they're at rest. And these birds, they kind of know who they are, and they're at rest. And I just felt like God actually wanted to speak on rest as much as faith today. And that idea of faith is actually a place of rest. If I'm worried about my finances, if I'm worried about everything that I got to do, I'm going to hustle and hustle and hustle, and I'm going to just try and keep this engine going. But the fact is that when I sit down, I go, God, you're in charge. I don't need to control it. I know what you said. You said you got this, so I'm going to let you have it. And for me, a lot of times, sometimes we can discuss faith as holding on real tight and not giving up. But for me, a lot of times, faith is an expression of letting go.
So good.
That's good.
It's literally an expression of going, if you're God and you're in control, I can let go of this stuff that I'm trying to control.
Come on.
Because I'm not.
Preach, bro.
I'm your kid. So
good.
I've crossed borders that way that I didn't think I'd get across. Literally, when I was in Burundi, I'll just give you a short story. I don't want to take the whole thing. But we were driving one day, and we're heading up to, I was supposed to travel with this guy to Tanzania, and I told God again, you want me to go, you meet these conditions. And of course he meets the conditions, because he knows when he wants me to be somewhere. I don't have to make the things happen. I don't have to try to squeeze, every little ounce out, of water out of something. God's got it, he's like a full sponge. So I went, you want me to go, you meet these conditions, I'll go. I'm not going to control it. So I sat down, and then, he goes, hey, I want you to come with me. I'm going to do this, this, and this for you. Will you come? Oh, that's everything I asked about. Okay, cool, coming. So I go, when we get to we're driving, right? We're going to go to this border, and we know that we have to export a car. I don't know if you guys have ever exported a car before, but that's where you transfer from one country to the next. There's a bit of paperwork involved. It's not like going to the DMV and just changing your registration from one state to another. And especially in Africa, it took him 4 months and hundreds of dollars, and it took him a lot of money to export his car from Burundi to Zambia. So we're driving, and we have we have a short drive to the border, and it's French, so we see these signs that say frontier or frontière, if you want to say it in French. And they're pointing toward the border, and he's like, hey, let's pray real quick. And I go, okay, that's cool, that's a good idea. We should pray as we get, the morning drive going. So we pray, and as we're just asking God, what do you want to do today? Come be with us, help us to travel. I see 2 signs, just in the natural, in rapid succession. One of them said, don't worry, and the other one said, trust. And I went, okay, that's kind of weird. I'm just going to take that as a sign, sorry, no pun, that God wants us to trust and not worry. And I went, cool, and totally forgot about it. So we're driving and having a good time, and we have this guy, he's a Burundian pastor, and he's traveling with us. His name's Florent. The guy was awesome. We loved him. So he was driving the car. He knows where he's going, and we've never been there before, so we get to the border of, we get up toward the border of Tanzania, and then all of a sudden Florent just goes, turns the car off the main, this giant, wide highway, and goes up this hill of like, dirt road with like deep, grooves cut into it by the water when it rains. And I'm like, this seems weird. And my friend Dave, the guy who's the missionary, is like, those moving, goes, oh, he knows where he's going. And I'm like, why are we getting off the main road if we're going to the border and going up a hill? And I'm like, that seems strange. Do you know? He's like, no, I'm sure it's here. And I went, okay, can we just ask someone really quick? Because I feel this seems like a weird idea. So he asks these taxi drivers, they're all parked along the side. They're like, oh yeah, just go that way, it's up there. So I'm like, I don't know, this doesn't make sense, but let's go. The sign was pointing that way. So we go up the hill, and he's like, oh, it's a different one. So we go up the hill, we drive, and then we hit a fork in the road, and we see a guy, and we're like, well, which way's the border? And they're like, oh, go that way. So we drive, and we're out in the middle of nowhere. There's people working on their roofs, and there's a little dirt road, and there's nothing, literally nothing there. And I went, I don't think we're heading to the border anymore, guys. And we're trying to get as far across Tanzania, because you don't want to drive at night there. It gets kind of dangerous. It's hard to see sometimes. You never know what you're going to encounter if your tire blows out. There's wild animals, there's all kinds of stuff. So anyway, we're trying to make as much time as we can. And so we get all the way out there, and then we're like, hey, let's just ask someone. And so we stop. They're like, oh, no, the fork in the road, you're supposed to go that way. No. So we drive another 45 minutes back or something like that. And we get to the fork in the road, and we make a turn. And I'm like, can we just make sure? I feel like we're heading back toward the capital again, and this is not where we want to be, right? We want to go to the border, and I just have a feeling we're not going the right way. So we pick some guy up, and we're like, hey, can we just give you some money, and you can take us to the border? And he goes, oh yeah, turn around. And so we go back the way we came. We go down the giant dirt hill, back on the road, and we had turned left off the road, so we hang a left. And there were these buildings in the distance, maybe 300 yards or 400 yards, that I had seen. And you know what that was? It was the border. So we literally had seen the border, and we turned off it. Right? And I'm going, he's freaking out. He's like, oh my gosh, we've lost 2 hours. That's a lot of daylight. We were going to make it to this spot. Now we're going to have to change my plans. And he was on a schedule, which in Africa you don't want to be on a schedule. Not too much anyway. You only have some gaps because it goes slower there.
Just a few.
A little bit. So anyway, we get to the border, and I'm like, okay, I got this. I'm going to go stand in the visa line. We'll get the transit visa. So you go stand in the export line. Whoever gets there first, we'll do that. So I'm in line, and I call him. I'm like, hey, Dave, we're almost to the front of the line. And he's like, just get out of line. We're not going anywhere today. And what do you mean? So I get out, and I walk over to where he's at, and I see Dave, and this is comical, because this is, I don't know. No matter what Dave did, he was the most honoring guy. They would always go and talk to me for some reason. But anyway, so Dave is on his knees, pleading with this border agent. Please let us through. Please let us through. And I'm like, what's going on here? And he's like, we can't get through. We don't have the forms. The guy wrote the wrong date when we did the 4 months of paperwork. We're not getting through the border. And I walk out and I go, And I just see trust, don't worry, just pop right in my head right at that moment. And I went, oh my gosh. Okay. I don't need to worry, I just need to trust. And I went, I can start praying right now and go, God, help us, help us, help us. But he already said he was going to help us. So I don't need to work at this. It's not about working. So I just went, okay, God, in the natural, I just sat down. And I went, I'm just going to trust you right now. I'm not going to ask you for what you've promised. Because do you guys know that you can actually pray and lose your faith at the same time? No, really, it's a weird concept. Most people don't think about it, but if God gives you a promise, and you're saying, God, please let me have this, and he goes, no, I told you I'm going to give you, oh, please, God, let me have it, you're not really acting in faith. And you need faith. And you can't operate, you can't please God without faith. So, taking my hands off was the most faith I could do. Right? So I sat down, and I went, okay, what do I need to do? God, I'm just going to worship you like you're talking about. I just need to thank you. So I just go, okay, God, you've got this. You're God, I'm not. You promised that we could trust you. If we need to get through, we're going to get through. And if you got a different plan, that's cool. But we trust you here. So we just let go. Literally about 30 seconds later. And I'm fighting inside. There's part of me that wants to go like, God, come, show up now, you know? And it's like he's there. So anyway, this guy Florent comes out, right? The pastor. He walks out real quick. And he's like, quick, do you have like, it was like 18,000, Burundian francs, which is like $20 or something. And he's like, do you have this money? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, quick, give it to me. And I'm like, oh no. And he's like, quick. And I'm like, what do you mean? Why do you need? I'm like, okay, sure. I'm like, whatever. I trust you guys. That whatever you got is going. And because I'm like, I don't want to pay bribes. And it's easy to do that in Africa. Sometimes you get into a tight spot, and sometimes it's easy to do that. And I never feel good about it. So I was like, oh no, I'm pretty sure we bribed them. I'm like, we broke down. And we ran out of faith. And so I went, oh, and then like a minute later, they come out, they're all smiling and laughing and joyous, and I'm meanwhile feeling horrible, because I'm like, oh no, I thought we had this. And I'm like, they're like, we're getting through, and I'm like, well, what happened? And they explained to me, and I don't know what's going on, and then explained to me some more, and we're in the visa line, and then we're getting in the car, and I'm like, wait a second, did you guys bribe them? And they're like, no. We didn't bribe them. What happened was, we were standing there, and some guy walks in, some long-distance trucker, and he recognizes Florent. And Florent's a pastor. And in Africa, if you're a pastor, it's a really high elevated position. They think you're amazing. And so he's like, oh, Pastor Florent, welcome. What are you doing here at the border? And the border agent goes, oh, I'm a Christian too. You know what? I've got a form right here, the legal form, the exact price, all written on it. And I went, oh my goodness. Now here's the thing. God told me to trust him, right? And not to worry. If we hadn't gotten lost for like 2.5 hours, that guy wouldn't have been there.
Come on, Jesus.
He would not have been there. We would have got to the border and then driven home. But because we got lost, we coincided. We actually learned something about God's nation. He actually knows what he's doing. Right? Like, we have our plans, and he knows what he's doing. And so that's what happened. And we literally walked out going, oh my goodness. He's so much better than I thought he was. He's so good at timing. He has what you need. I had that amount of money in my wallet, like what? And it's like literally just sitting down and trusting him. That's faith. So anyway, I'll stop. I got lost.
I think that's not, you did
Probably
get it.
too far.
Guys, it is, sorry, it's good, right? That was a good story, right? Yeah. Faith comes by hearing the word of God. Faith is shared. And this is what I love about faith. I love what you said, John. Sometimes you hold on to things, and sometimes you let go of things. Faith is something really interesting. I call them faith push-ups. I like doing faith push-ups because faith is also a muscle. It grows the more we use it. And sometimes I think push-ups are the most waste of time. Just by the way, I do not like doing push-ups.
I love push-ups.
Yeah, push-ups. You like doing push-ups too? Awesome, bro. I don't. I think they're a waste of time. I really get frustrated whenever I do them. But here's the thing. Sometimes we've got to choose small things to trust God for. So that we build the stamina and the strength to trust God for the big things. Does this make sense? It's a muscle. You've got to use it. Faith is so powerful. There's a story I heard. It's not my story, but it's a story of these two ministers. They're driving in a car somewhere, and this one minister is young, and the other one is older in age and experience. And the older gentleman says, son, why don't you pray for us before we go into this meeting? And this guy just starts spitting out his Pentecostal prayer, binding and loosing and just praying and praying and praying and praying and praying. And by the time he was done praying, he had no more words left. It was the older gentleman's turn. And he said, thank you, Jesus. And the presence of God fell in that car. And they were undone in God's presence. It's not about what we do that changes the circumstance. It's what God does that changes the environment, the atmosphere, and the circumstances that we are facing. Faith is the confidence. What's that Bible verse? I'm going to read it before I forget it. Faith is, and look at the time on my phone, it's 11:11. 1:11, that's great. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see yet. Confidence. Confidence. And faith cannot be conjured up. It cannot be like, you've got to have faith. Faith is a gift from God. It comes from Him. It doesn't originate inside of you. To trust God and believe God does not come from you. It's a supernatural gift. And you've got faith, which means He's given you the thing that you need to see the thing that you want fulfilled. That's crazy. So let's do something while we close. Everyone, if you could just close your eyes with us. And a few things were brought up today. But the one that I really want to hone on in is if you feel like you have been disappointed by God, you trust Him for something.